the classic example of that, trans women get a lot of stick sometimes from people who say that we're upholding stereotypical 1950s femininity.
Mhm.
But it was only very recently that if we didn't present like that, we would not get healthcare.
Yeah.
And, I don't know how true this is, but there was certainly talk that if the clinician did not imagine themselves wanting to sleep with you after transition, you would not get healthcare.
Hello and welcome to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. We get curious about all things gender, sex, and sexuality, as well as relationships, feminism, the inclusive kind, neurodivergence, disability, kink, mental health, and all that makes us humans unique and diverse. From body positivity to body dysmorphia, it's all welcome here. If you appreciate this podcast and want to support us, visit our website 50shadesofgender.com, as in FIFTY, to make a donation, find out more about our allyship course and workshops, and details of how to join our community. Now, join us on a journey of inclusion, acceptance, and respect. I'm your host, Esther Lemons. I am a queer woman, and my pronouns are she and they. In this episode, I have a conversation with CARRIE MARSHALL, a writer, musician, and author of her memoir, Carrie Kills a Man. Carrie's pronouns are she and her, and she is a trans woman. She is also a lesbian and demisexual. Find out what that means to Carrie in this episode. We also talk about transness only making sense in the rearview mirror, how much more challenging things can become once you start transition, what the anti-trans movement has in common with the witch trials, being ambushed in the media, why everything is gendered, hope for the future, and walking unafraid. Please be aware that there is a brief mention of suicide in this episode. It was recorded on the 10th of October 2023. Now let's get into the episode. Hello and welcome. What's your name?
My name is CARRIE MARSHALL.
Hello, Carrie. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So you gave me, let's just dive straight into gender. I'm not a small talk kind of person, as people well know by now. So, so the labels you gave me were trans woman, lesbian, and demisexual.
That's right. Yes.
So, let's start at the beginning. What has your journey been like? Where are you at now? And, anything in between you want to cover.
I, I've had a fairly delayed journey, I think. I'm not one of these people who knew at a very early age what my gender identity was or what my sexuality was. And I think I I basically fought against it for a very, very long time. And it all came together in my mid-40s. I came out at the age of 44. I thought I was non-binary at first, but the more binary that I presented, the more I realized I was definitely binary, but just not the binary that I thought I had been in. Um,
Right.
and I saw this described really well. I think it was by Doc Impossible. It's like gender and sexuality are a bit like an onion, and that you have this layer on the outside, and you think, well, that's it. And then you peel that off, and it's like, oh, there's another layer. That's
Mm.
very much the case in terms of when I dealt with my transness, that started to be resolved, and I started to become aware of other things. So I'm currently waiting for a diagnosis of ADHD, for example.
Mm.
And it's another very similar thing where you look back on your earlier life and you go, that's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes so much sense when you have that clarifying thing. But at the time you didn't know, because these were just all like different facets of your personality. That I've come to realize that most people don't have 26 electric guitars.
That's just weird. I mean, why wouldn't you,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I've only got 2 hands, so I don't know why I've got 26 of these damn things, but, um, and one of the things that I think is really interesting about it is that when you know what it is, it feels like a weight is off, even if you're not actually doing anything about it yet.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Just
Yes.
understanding what's going on. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
So, in the case of my gender, coming out as trans hasn't solved all of the problems in my life, but it has cleared up that confusion as to what was going on, and it's
Mm.
given me almost a base that I can stand on to deal with all the stuff that goes on in your life. Because of course, the only thing that transition cures is the feelings of incongruousness. It
Mm.
doesn't solve any sadness that's in your life or any challenges that you have, but
Yeah.
it makes you a better place to cope with it, I think.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking about some of the things you said in your book,
Mm.
and the title the title of the book, "Carrie Kills a Man." I think that is such a good one. So you basically said you wanted to be Velma from Scooby Doo rather than
Yes.
Batman. So that was
Still
one
do.
thing, and you said you had a pretty good. You had a pretty good life going on, and then you said you basically had this secret that threw a hand grenade into all of it.
Yes.
So, yeah, what happened there?
I think one of the things about my transness is it's something that only makes sense in the rearview mirror. So
Mm,
as I was getting older in my life, there were various things that were going on that I didn't connect to various other things that were going on. So I talk about in the book, like I knew from about the age of 6 that I wasn't the same as the other boys, but I didn't know why or how. I just knew that a lot of the things that I wanted to do or to be were just not allowed.
mm,
Um, so one of the things that happened was I did a wee bit of dating as a teenager and then just stopped because I started to become aware that I had this secret, and I felt that it would be like the iceberg for the Titanic in terms of any sort of relationship, and that it wasn't
mm,
fair on the girl, or it wasn't fair on me to get into a relationship with the potential of this thing to just destroy the whole thing. So I didn't date until I was 29, going on 30.
mhm,
And I met someone, and for a period at least, the feelings of needing to express my gender went away. I thought I'd been cured by the love of a good woman. And
mm.
it's such a cliche, but I don't know if this is a bit vulgar, but it's like, you have a point in the relationship where you're behaving, and then one of you farts in the room, and
Yeah,
that's it. That's the honeymoon period over.
right.
And and I think
Totally.
there is a similar thing with the gender stuff, which is that I thought I'd been cured, but then the feelings started to come back again, that I wasn't being me, that I wasn't being honest about myself, and that was something that
Mm,
I really tried to tamp down on, because I'd met this amazing woman who I loved dearly,
mhm,
and I didn't want to be trans, and this is something that comes up again and again with my generation. I'm 50 now.
mhm,
Um, we didn't a lot of us didn't want to be trans because we have spent our whole lives being told that trans is bad, that trans is disgusting, that it's deviant, that it's dangerous, that nobody could ever love you.
mm,
And as you get further into your life, and you're with somebody that you love very much, you don't want to to throw all of that wonderful stuff away. So
mm,
I ended up in the situation where I was terribly depressed. I was actively planning to kill myself,
mm,
and I went to the doctors in quite a lot of desperation. And we tried antidepressants, we tried counseling for the I was drinking far too much at the time, and it started to become very, very obvious that these things were symptoms, and that
mm.
the fundamental problem was that I wasn't being honest with myself and the people around me about who I was.
Yeah.
And then you're in a situation where, at that point, I had a pretty nice job in the media. I had this beautiful family. I had 2 children, nice social life, and all of these things. And then to come out really is to throw a hand grenade into that, because I mean it's not as bad as I thought before I came out, but I had visions of being run out of town on a railroad, with yokels and flaming torches and all of that,
Mm,
and that wasn't quite what happened. But you know, something that I tried to put across in the book is to try and imagine it from your partner's point of view. So if my wife, who is a cisgender woman, if she had been the one telling me that she wanted to transition, that she wanted to change her gender presentation, that she wanted to go on hormones, grow out her leg hair, get a mustache and a beard and all that kind of thing, I don't know if I would have been able to handle that.
mm,
Because it's such a change of what the sort of the contract that you have in a relationship.
mhm,
And my wife tried really hard to to be okay with the trans stuff,
mhm,
but in the end she married a man,
mm,
and that turned out not to be who I was. And we're still
mm.
friends, we've got a great relationship now, but
Yeah.
that physical attraction just wasn't there, because I went from being absolutely her type to being the complete opposite
Yeah.
of her type.
Mhm,
And once that happens, there's no amount of fixing it. But one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about my relationship in the book, and I stopped writing the book for a while because I didn't know how it would end, and at that point things were still in flux with myself
mm.
and my ex-wife.
Yeah.
I didn't want this to be a misery memoir. because I know that
Mm.
a huge amount of trans people, their relationships survive and thrive.
Hmm.
And, even though I'm not together with my wife anymore in that respect, we're still really good pals. We still have a really good laugh. So it wasn't the end of the world. It was the end of a time rather
Yeah.
than the end of everything, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And what's your relationship with your kids like now?
It's really good.
Yeah.
That was the real fear.
Mm.
I think because me and my ex-wife are grown ups. We can handle stuff.
Yeah.
But my kids at the time were 9 and 3,
Wow. Yeah.
and for your dad to become kind of different in that respect is difficult. And there was
Mm.
a number of things that we did. So my wife and I, we agreed that I wasn't going to present female or obviously female on the school run. So I ended up in this situation where I was almost like a superhero having to change in a phone box on the way to do the school run,
Oh
and
gosh,
it's
yeah.
like I don't, I would never have turned up to the primary school gates dressed like Dolly Parton.
Hmm.
That's not the kind of look that I'm going for.
Hmm.
But you don't want your kids to get bullied. And having been bullied at school over my gender
Hmm.
and my sexuality, I didn't want that to repeat. And so far, it seems to be okay. So my daughter is 16 and my son is 10. And
Hmm.
they're just really clued up kids, and it's really interesting, particularly my daughter's generation, because to them this is just not a thing.
Yeah.
It's of no
Right.
concern, of no interest. It's like, what sort of games console does she have? And provided you can answer that, then
Yeah.
they're not bothered about what gender. And, you
Hmm.
know, we lost a couple of mutual family friends when I came out, and I don't know to this day if that was because of the transness or if they felt that divorce might be contagious or
Mm.
what it could be. And you do tend to assume the worst, and you tend to think, right, well, this is clearly a gender thing. But
Hmm.
there's plenty of parents that call me Carrie and that are absolutely fine with my kids playing with their kids. So there hasn't been the outright refusal to accept it that I feared. I mean, there was some dodgy stuff on Facebook when I first came out, where
Hmm.
people were posting stuff that they knew that my wife would see, but they were wording it in
Mm.
such a way that it wasn't specific.
Mm.
Um, but no, generally it's been fine. But I did spend a long time not doing things like kids' birthday parties or anything like that because I didn't want to be seen around my children. Because there are
Mm.
signs, once you start transition, once you start going on
Of
HRT,
course. Yeah.
once you've replaced your entire male wardrobe, you might still be turning up in jeans and a top, but they're quite clearly not a middle-aged man's jeans and a top, and people do
Mm.
notice that kind of stuff. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
it's
It's like you say in the book as well. Like when once you started transitioning, it was almost, I can't remember the exact words you used, but it was more scary. Yeah.
yeah, because you can. If you're not on any sort of medical transition, then it is just a matter of washing off the makeup and putting on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
But when you start, particularly when you start developing a chest, for example,
Mhm.
um, summer days become a real challenge. I mean, I wrote about
Yeah.
this in the book. I would turn up in a parka on the hottest day of the year, like Liam Gallagher or something, because I didn't want anybody to see what was obviously changing.
Yeah.
And there's also the issue as well that certainly for me, I don't know if this is true for all trans women, but certainly for me, when you first come out, your dress sense is not there in any respect whatsoever. It's
Yeah.
I describe myself as looking like an explosion in a clown factory, and that has very much been the case. I,
Well.
I I went into the pub one night thinking I was looking quite good, and my friend who's a cis woman said, "Wow, that's a strong look." and, you know, and so I went home, went home and got changed
Oh
after that.
no. Oh, that's very delicately put, isn't it?
It
That's
was
a
very
strong look.
diplomatically
That's
done,
an
yeah.
interesting choice you've made there. Yeah, I like that.
I
But
can hear
it's
echoes of it. My
yeah,
son was playing music last night, and it was
yeah,
dreadful. He's like, "What do you think?" It's like, "Yeah, it's really interesting. That's
yeah.
pretty strong."
We try and be supportive, right?
You do, yeah.
But it is like that though, because obviously when women growing up, cis women, I suppose, AFAB folks, um, when they get to their teen years, they've got peers to figure this stuff out with. They've got
Yes.
role models. They've got, it's problematic in ways with beauty industry and stuff like that. But that aside, there are other people they can turn to, bounce off of, stuff like that. But if you come out, especially at a later age, who you can do that with?
Yeah.
You don't have anyone,
I think there's also the thing as well that when you and again, this was definitely true for me, coming out later in life, there's an image of who you would like to be in your head
Mm.
that doesn't really reflect who you are now. So, in my again, I say it in the book. In my head, I'm Emma Stone, the very beautiful actor, but I'm actually more Fred Flintstone. And you see this quite a lot. You see newly out trans women dressing for the age they would like to be rather than the
Mm.
age they are. And this is not unique to trans women, but like you
Mm.
say, cis women are more likely to have a network of peers and of lived experience to know that, well, that's not going to work, or if I dress in a particular way, it's going to get this kind of reaction.
Mhm.
So, I wanted to look like the women that I was attracted to in my 20s. So I,
Mm.
I kind of dress like that because I want to be attractive. I think that's a universal thing. We want to feel
Mhm.
good in our skin, to feel good the way we present ourselves.
Yeah.
So yeah, I spent an awful lot of stuff on things that were too short and too tight, too revealing, just terrible, terrible shapes. I discovered the hard way that peplum and I will never ever get on. Um, it things like makeup and stuff as well though. Like you don't really know what you're doing.
Mhm.
And I'm what 7 years now since I came out, and
Mhm.
I'm starting to get the hang of it. But I was going out looking like Donald Trump's mum, you know, and and it's a difficult one because you've got this it's this horrible thing where you don't want to attract attention from other
Mm.
people because attention can be a problem,
Yeah.
but you don't have the knowledge or the skills to avoid attention. So what you do to try
Mm.
and blend in actually makes you stand out
Yeah,
in a
that's such a
number of
good
ways.
point, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, like the whole passing thing,
Yeah.
it's like from my perspective, like the way I was thinking about it a while ago was like, well, no one should have to, people should
Yes,
be
I agree.
accepting no matter what. But that I mean, that's great coming from my perspective, but I'm not having the experience of that exactly what you just said,
Yeah.
and like
Well,
it's a safety thing as well.
safety is a
Yeah.
huge bit of it. I found that if you present in a confusing way to other people, that's much
Mm.
more problematic than if you're very, very binary, very stereotypical. So, I
Yeah.
mean, the classic example of that, trans women get a lot of stick sometimes from people who say that we're upholding stereotypical 1950s femininity.
Mhm.
But it was only very recently that if we didn't present like that, we would not get healthcare.
Yeah.
And, it was I don't know how true this is, but there was certainly talk that if the clinician did not imagine themselves wanting to sleep with you after transition, you would not get healthcare.
Mm.
And this
Yeah.
information, this travels around the message boards and stuff, and people talk about it. So,
Yeah.
when you're very stereotypically feminine, people know who you are,
Mhm.
you know? And there's also an element of trying to prove something. So before I got a gender recognition certificate, I was much more stereotypically feminine because I felt I had to prove that now I had to come out. I had to prove that I was feminine,
Mm.
that I was worthy of it, that I wasn't pretending,
Mhm.
that I didn't see gender as a costume, because that's one
Yeah.
of the other accusations. Whereas now that I'm comfortable in who I am and I know who I am, most of the time I dress as if I'm putting the bins out because that's usually what I'm doing. And I'm not going to bother, with the wig and the makeup and all the rest of it if I'm just going to go and buy a loaf of bread because most cisgender women don't do that either.
Right.
I have got some friends who will absolutely go out like movie stars and will not leave the house
Mhm.
unless they look absolutely
Yeah.
spectacular. But most of my pals don't do that.
Mhm.
And I don't do that anymore because I don't feel that I've got anything to prove anymore.
Mm.
And and also there's the idea of your clothing and your makeup being a suit of armor.
Mhm.
And I definitely find that like if I'm performing in my band, I will really glam up because
Mhm.
it's like it's a safety thing. It's like I get to be
Yeah.
almost like this character
Yeah.
rather than the fairly frightened and fairly shy individual that I am. I can
Mhm.
be much more of an Amazon and go, hey.
Mm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
do you know what it really reminds me of? It reminds me of goths and heavy metal kids, like emo kids, and they look terrifying, and they're the sweetest people on earth.
Yeah.
But that's why they do the terrifying thing because they're not scary
Mhm.
otherwise. But if you give them enough studs and enough leather and enough eyeliner, then they look a wee bit more intimidating.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I kind of feel a bit like that. I feel real kinship with goths and emo kids. I just wish I was young enough to be one of them, you know?
I know what you mean, yeah. I used to be into metal and stuff, so
Oh, cool.
that was the scene that I hung out in,
Yeah.
and it's really interesting, like, yeah, how they're perceived and stuff, but I remember, like, being at gigs and doing all the moshing around and stuff, and if ever anyone falls down, they just help you up, they pick you
Yes.
up. There's a
Yeah.
real that's really part of well, it was when I was, that age. That's a few
Yeah.
years ago
No,
now,
it's
so
still
I'm a
the
bit out
case.
of it. But yeah, that's how it's done, that's what you
Yeah.
do.
My
And
daughter's part of that scene
yeah,
and finds exactly the same thing, that it's
yeah.
a
Oh,
very,
good.
very accepting, very inclusive,
Yeah, glad
very
to hear it's
friendly
still
scene,
like
yeah.
that. Yeah.
And it's great because the bands are things like cattle decapitation is one of her favorites at the moment. So it's all these terrifying sounding
Right?
things doing this
Yeah,
very aggressive music, and
yeah.
they're all sweet wee loves, so they are. It's wonderful.
She'll ruin their reputation.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
Yeah, totally.
Ah, totally, yeah. So that reminds me of something that you talk about in the book. You talked about some of the witch trials. So you mentioned this example of someone like high up and very privileged in society accusing someone of witchcraft. So, and you say her class privilege meant her accusations carried much more weight than any servant's denials. And then she weaponized people's fears, superstition, and desire to protect children. So that sounds, quite recognizable, doesn't it?
It is. This was in a place called Gallow Green, which is in Paisley, just outside Glasgow, and I think it was about the late 1600s.
Mm,
And what it was, this was the daughter of a nobleman who caught one of the serving staff sneaking a drink of milk,
mm,
grassed her in to the mum, who was the lady of the house.
mm,
The the servant was disciplined, and the servant basically said to the daughter, "I'd like to see your soul dragged through hell." At which point, this girl was totally at it and started claiming that she'd been put a curse on her.
mhm,
It was all nonsense, and it was clearly being influenced by what was coming out of Salem at the time.
mhm,
Um, but if you look at the history of witches, I mean, it was absolutely done by the men. The men were the people who tracked down the witches. They were the ones who tried them, and they were the ones who killed them.
mm,
But they were not often the ones who accused them in the first place. And there's a huge history
mm,
of this, and it was women who didn't fit. So there were, for example, there were women accused of witchcraft because they had not been grateful enough for charity that had been bestowed upon them. There was women who were what we would consider now to be homeopathic healers
mm,
who were accused of witchcraft. Disabled women. There was one that I read about. It was a woman accused of witchcraft because she had bewitched a 16-year-old girl. So clearly, we're talking about queer women here. So
mhm,
this was a very effective way of social control,
mhm.
of pointing to a perfectly innocent person who just was troublesome to you.
Yeah.
And it ties in with, the whole idea of stochastic terrorism, that won't somebody rid me of this troublesome priest. What these women were doing was they were not doing the violence themselves. They were asking the men to do the violence on their behalf. And there was an
Mhm,
absolute straight line between that and libs of TikTok with what they're doing on Twitter today, where they are sending howling mobs of people after school teachers and librarians and all the rest of it
mm,
because it personally displeases them. And
yeah.
it's one of the things that I find quite galling about the anti-trans movement is that they have the cheek to say that they are the descendants of the witches they couldn't burn, whereas you're not. You're the descendants of the accusers.
Mm,
It's the queer people and the disabled people and the inconvenient people who were the ones that got burnt. And there
mm,
were a number of women that made a very good living out of being witch finders. They were accused of
mm,
this, and then they would turn around and go, "No, no, 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 no! I will tell you who the witches are." And Scotland's greatest witch finders were women.
mm, mm. Interesting, right? Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah.
it's something that I could have gone into a lot more detail in the book, but I was very lucky that Sean Fay brought out the transgender issue.
Ah, yeah.
And that meant I could scrap about half of my book because I wanted to
Wow.
set out and debunk a whole bunch of stuff, and then it's like Sean just did it so beautifully.
Mm.
It's like, "Oh, thank God I can go back to talking about me getting stuck in a dress and not being able to escape my bedroom," you know? Because
Yeah.
I'm better at that. I'm better at the what an idiot I am rather than the wider geopolitical stuff. But it's this whole my timing has been very strange because I came out literally just before the trans panic started. It
Mm,
hadn't really got into gear until early 2017.
Mm.
and I came out at the very, very end of 2016. And it's been astonishing. It's been like, you know, the film Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where
Yeah, vaguely remember that. Gosh.
everybody looks the same, but
Mm.
they're not there anymore. They're not.
Mm.
You're disconnected, and it's like, am I the one that's gone wrong here? Am I the one that's gone completely mad? Because you have all these people believing the most astonishing bullshit,
Mm.
and you know, and it's very, very similar to, you know, I saw Goody Smith down at the burn with the devil. It's like, but this is so blatantly untrue. I mean, I laugh about it in the book, but I've seen people say that trans women don't have pelvises. That Stonewall says that trans women who are on HRT are not allowed to go up in lifts. That trans women cannot grow
What?
breast tissue, and these are the supposed biology experts. You know, and it's
Yeah.
like, well, you know, maybe if you read a book, it's and it annoys me
Oh.
that I let these people get under my skin, and I
Mm.
could easily rant for 4 hours about it, and it's just such a waste of time,
Yeah.
of our time, you
It's
know?
hard to not get sucked into that, isn't it?
It
But
is.
yeah, but interestingly, I heard someone describing there's a book that by Travis Alabanza
Oh, yeah.
where they say going into all that stuff, really getting sucked in and trying to defend yourself and trying to debunk and just, trying to convert one person, they call it self-harm.
It is.
And it's like, wow, that was so. I think it was that book and them. So I hope I got that right. But yeah, that was such a like, whoa, that is, yeah,
Yeah. There was an
that's
absolute
powerful.
there was a trans and non-binary rite of passage, I think, where you come out and you think, I'm the one that can persuade them. The problem is not that
Mm,
these people are wicked. The problem is that it just hasn't been explained to them in the right way. And I can do that. So
mm,
I will.
yeah,
And, you know, 6 months later, you're like, screw these guys. They're all
yeah.
wicked, you know?
Fuck this. I don't have time
Yeah.
for this shit. Right?
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
like, I don't know if it was Mark Twain that said it, but it's the idea that it's like wrestling with a pig. You get filthy and the pig loves it, and it doesn't change anything
yeah.
because, I mean, the thing about all this stuff is that, you know, that it's like the Christian right does this in particular. They try and put forward the idea that they have got concerns and this is how they've ended up at the anti-trans thing, but it
Mm.
doesn't work like that. They start off with the anti-trans thing and then we'll pick
They work in.
any, yeah, anything at all. So, you know, it's all about, you know, we don't want trans people in toilets attacking people. And it's like when the evidence was produced that this is just not a thing that happens, it's like, yeah, but we don't want men pretending to be trans people attacking people in toilets. And when we proved that was wrong, they moved on to sports. And then when that was proved wrong, it was, oh yeah, and it goes on and it goes on
Mm,
because
mhm,
it's like it's like the whole idea of arguing with fascists that we've been talking about, you know, since the 1930s, which is
mm,
they don't believe a word that they're saying. They're toying with you. It's a game to them.
mm,
And
mm.
what they're hoping to do is a technique called bear baiting. What they want to do is to make you so angry that you snap and say something that they can quote or screenshot
Yeah, and use
as
against
proof.
you. Yeah, yeah,
And it's true,
exactly.
you know, like
Yeah.
uh, as a trans woman, if I go in tomorrow and rob a post office at gunpoint, it's not going to be reported as Glaswegian woman robs a post office. It's going to be trans woman
Yeah.
robs a post office. So you do sort of censor yourself
Mm,
because I mean we've got plenty of things to be angry about,
mm,
but we're not because people go, violent man can't keep a lid on your temper. It's like no, I just we're under constant assault, and you know it's going to end. We're talking here, you know, the day after the local elections in America, where the bigots have been absolutely handed their arse to them, and you know, in states where they've spent like $5 million on anti-trans attack ads, they've just been booted out of office. But it takes time for that mechanism to happen.
mm,
And in the meantime, the damage that these people do, the
yeah.
damage they've done to the public perception of trans people, the
Mm,
damage they've done to specific trans people and to their healthcare
yeah.
is absolutely astonishing. And you know, I'm reading today the Scottish government is about to embark on a public consultation into banning conversion therapy, and it's like, oh great, because if there's one thing
Mm,
LGBTQ plus people want, it's a public consultation about whether it's okay to torture us or not. You
right.
know, and you know, we've seen this. We had 3 consultations under gender recognition reform, and they were
Mhm,
attacked by the Christian right,
mm,
and it was turned into a referendum on whether trans people are human.
wow.
And
Mm,
you know, it was a real. it was a real mistake, and I'm going off on one now, but this all started because of government laziness. So we had a situation where under Theresa May's government, there was an LGBTQ action group, and their job was to look at how we could improve the lives of LGBT plus people in
Mhm.
Britain. And they came back with all of these recommendations, and number one was healthcare, way beyond anything else. Healthcare, healthcare, healthcare.
Mhm.
Then way down the bottom was, oh, we could maybe change the gender recognition system as well. And the May government looked at this and thought, healthcare? No, that costs too much money. What's the cheapest thing we can do to make it look like we give a shit? And
Mm.
they came up with gender recognition reform. Nobody really cared about gender recognition reform. It's something that the Tony Blair government was forced into doing by the European courts.
Mm.
It's not a great system. A lot of trans people are deeply uncomfortable with having a national register of transgender people. And it's not on our radar. But the May government made this what they were going to do to solve all the problems of LGBT plus people. And
Mm.
the Christian right just seized on it.
Mhm.
And three consultations later, our rights are going backwards. So
Mhm.
thanks a lot,
Mm.
Teresa. That was great.
God, yeah. See, that's the thing. I try and stay away from that level of politics because I
Yeah.
just can't. I just cannot even. I leave that. That's another person's lane. I have to leave that to
Yeah.
them.
No, you're right. I mean,
But
the
yeah.
vast majority of high profile trans people that I've been following since I came out have stopped posting publicly,
Mm.
are not doing social media, are not going on the BBC, and definitely not going on the likes of,
Mm.
GB News and stuff,
Yeah.
because they're burned out with it, because it has been
It
constant. It's
takes
been
its
absolutely
toll.
relentless. Yeah.
Like, yeah, like Katie, a project partner, Katie, she still does a lot of GB News and public stuff.
Yeah.
But it's draining, I can tell. It's like, yeah, yeah.
Well, I've recently stopped. I've been a regular contributor to BBC Scotland for 22 years,
Mm.
and I've kind of stopped because I kind of felt that I was almost being a human shield. That
Mm.
my presence there was enabling to say, "Look, we've got a trans person on board, so we cannot possibly be
Yeah,
anti-trans." But then the rest of the output of the channel is astonishingly anti-trans, and
yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
and I just didn't feel comfortable there anymore. And I
Mm.
I'm not that important, obviously, but it kind of felt a wee bit like, you know, am I doing the right thing here, or am I putting out a weekly appearance fee ahead of my principles? And I kind of felt that I was, so I stopped. Because I don't want to be
Mm.
doing that. I don't I this is great. I'd love doing this kind of thing, but
Mm.
I don't want to be going onto the news to try and educate people who don't want to be educated about what
Yeah, that's a
transgender
waste
people
of
are.
time, isn't
And a
it? Yeah.
and a good example of that, I was on talking about gender recognition reform, and I was on with a journalist who's written extensively about why trans people are dangerous and we shouldn't get any rights and all the rest of it. And I was talking about how, in order to get my gender recognition certificate, I had to use the ladies' toilet for 2 years before I was even given, like, hormone treatment or anything, and
Mm.
she didn't know that. And it's like
Wow.
I'm on a national broadcaster, and they're inviting this person on who is just coming in and talking from a position of absolute ignorance.
Mm.
And I've been invited on TV a few times when they've said, "Can you come on and argue this?" And it's like, "But that's not true." And they're like, "Yeah, but can you?" And it's like, "No, I'm not coming on." So
Mm.
it's all this kinda it's manufactured dissent almost,
Mm.
where there's not really an interest in informing people what's going on, but it's about having an argument and ideally a proper fight.
Yeah.
So I would agree to do things. It's like, "You're gonna come on." It's like, "Who am I gonna come on with?" "Oh, we're just gonna have somebody else who's knowledgeable about it." And then I would go on, it'd be Brendan O'Neill from Spiked. And the one thing Brendan O'Neill from Spiked is not is an expert on trans healthcare. He's an expert on pushing division.
Mm.
And I kinda got fed up being ambushed by that and just
Yeah,
refused to
like
go back
ambushed is
on.
a good word, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it? And it's all like so performative, and you're like the token, you know,
Yeah,
gender diverse person. It's
and
kind of like with Pride Month when people are like, get all the rainbows out, but
yeah,
they do fuck all else
yeah.
to actually, make that mean something. Yeah.
Yeah, and in fairness to some of the media, part of the problem is a lot of times people are massively overworked. So, you have
Mhm.
a researcher who's doing a program and they've got 10 items to get people on air for. They don't
Mhm.
have the time to research. So if you've got a Twitter account and a logo and you are the alliance whatever, you can
Mm.
purport to be a serious group. And if you say that you're a feminist group, they'll go, okay, right, fine, and they'll put you on air. And I
Mm.
had that with the producer where we're talking again about trans legislation. And it says, so we'll have you on, and then we'll have these people on to talk about the feminist point of view. And it's like, well, hang on a minute.
Mm.
They're not a feminist group. They're an anti-trans group. Because if you want the feminist point of view, you've got Zero Tolerance Scotland, you've got, all of the women's charities in Scotland, you've got the Equality Network, you've got, all of these different groups that actually work on
Mm,
behalf of cis women.
mm,
We're all in favor of the legal changes. But, you have 4 women with a Twitter account who really hate trans people get to come on and claim to be the feminists, and
mm.
it's not deliberate, but it's very, very easy to game, and it's the same thing that has, all these think tanks that are constantly on the news that are being
Yeah.
backed by dark money or right-wing billionaires. They're playing the system because the system is based on people not being liars,
Mm.
and not misrepresenting themselves, and I think there's a deep irony when they talk about trans people pretending to be people they're not, when all of these, fake grassroots groups
Right.
are pretending that they are somehow representative of the vast majority of women because they are definitely not.
The pot calling the clean kettle black, huh?
Just a little bit, yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And I've been ranting again, I'm sorry. I do go
That's
off
all
and on
right.
with this kind of stuff.
No, it's all like it's interesting because this is the kind of stuff that I don't go into too deeply. And sometimes I have to ask people like, look, give me the TLDR on this because I know
Yeah,
I'm not going to read 6 articles about it. I just can't. Give me a summary, please, because then I have some idea of what's going on.
yeah.
So yeah, just looking back on some of the things you wrote in your book, there was one thing that I found very not just one thing, but there was something that I found quite amusing. You said I ended up with a body that didn't quite match who I am, a biological soup that wasn't quite what I ordered. And because I'm British, I didn't complain and I was too scared to send it back. Yeah, and then you say you weren't born. I wasn't born in the wrong body. I was born on the wrong planet. Do you
Yeah,
think that? Because I feel that sometimes. I'm neurospicy, and I feel I don't know what flavor, but it's I don't know. It's probably a blend of stuff.
yeah.
And so, what do you? How do you feel? You feel like being on the wrong planet. Does that have to do with neurodivergence as well? You think, or other facets of identity?
I think it's a bit of everything. This is going to sound like I'm a horrible name dropper, but I was talking to Robin Ince after one of his events. He was up in Glasgow, and I've always wanted to meet the guy because he's just such a great, great writer.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about this, and he talks about his own ADHD, and I was saying there's so much in common with transness, and I now know that that's because an awful lot of it overlaps. But he said that the corridor of what is considered normal is very narrow and very rigidly policed, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that's true. And I use the example of sexuality being a spectrum. Like, I consider myself to be a gay woman. I'm attracted exclusively to women,
Mm-hmm.
with the exception of Michael Stipe from REM in 1997. And I'm quite sure that given enough cider, my boundaries would be blurrier as
Yeah.
well, because I don't think I'm 100% attracted to women, but I'm 90 something percent.
Yeah.
And, but we try and put a binary on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it is the same with gender and neurotypicality in particular. I mean, the ADHD thing is, I mean, there's so many people I know that are neurospicy, and to varying degrees of it. Um, and do you know what it is? It's like we like simple stories. We've always liked simple stories. We like good or evil, hot or cold, light or dark.
Mm.
We're not so good with shades of gray. So
Yeah.
one of the things that I think is really, really interesting about transness, and I think one of the reasons that it's so hated by particularly evangelical religious fundamentalists, is because we are undermining their story, right?
Mm.
So if you've got a society that's built on the idea of penis people are better and they deserve all the stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you get some penis people come out and go, well, actually, you know what? I don't want to be part of this. I don't feel right. I'm not,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if, but if it's so malleable that you can change that with some hormones and a bit of surgery, what does that say about the divine right to rule of the penis people? Do
Right.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And and it's like for years we've seen women excluded from things on the grounds that they were supposedly inferior and incapable, and it wasn't the case at all. One of my favorite examples of this is I'm a technology journalist, so I cover computing and that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Computing was considered a woman's job. The very word computer meant a woman who did the computing. And
Wow.
then in the late 1970s, suddenly computing got sexy, right? We had Apple came along, we had the IBM PC,
Uh-huh.
and the guys just went, right, computing is sexy now, get out of here, you know?
Mm.
And all the women were sidelined. And it became a very male. dominated sector, whereas previously the men weren't interested because they considered it beneath them. So,
Mm-hmm.
the incredible women who did all the calculations to get the Apollo rockets not to kill the
Yeah.
people inside them,
Yeah.
right? They were the pioneers of all of this.
Mm, yeah.
And, anybody who wants to argue that they were in any way inferior to the guys, you can get stuffed. But we have all these patriarchal things, and I'm going to go off on another one, I'm afraid. But it's like
Go on.
back back in the day, we're like hundreds and hundreds of years ago, like trans, gender non-conforming, and sexual fluidity has been in every society as long as there has been people.
Mm,
And then round about the time of the Crusades, we started having Christians stomping about the world, going, "Stop that! Stop having fun." So we have the Hijira people in India, we have the Two Spirit people in North America, we have all kinds of genders and all kinds of cultures. And then you basically had people going around the world colonizing it and going, right, here are the rules now. So,
yeah.
we try and decry the homophobia in Africa, for example. We put that there. We exported that with our missionaries
Mm,
because before we went out there, nobody was greatly bothered. It was much more fluid. And then we went out and go, no, God says, right, you're allowed two genders and you're either male or female, and if you're male, you like females, and if you're female, you like males, and that's it. And anything else is wrong and is a sin and will be punished. And we cracked down massively on it.
mm,
And so all that's happening now is a rebalancing of that, you know,
mm,
where people are coming back and going, hang on a minute, you know, why? Where does this come from?
mm,
Where's the evidence for this? It's really interesting because I'm not a person of faith, and the more I learn about biology and human variety, the more astonishing and magical it seems to me.
mhm.
Because I was taught quite a simple version of it, and it's like every single one of us is a miracle. There are so many different
Yeah.
factors that make us who we are,
Mm,
and I'm not going to start going to church anytime soon. But my rock solid belief in my own atheism is it's on a sugary peg now, because the more I learn about what's going on, it's like, "This is amazing. This is just,"
right?
and then you've got these people who claim to be the biological experts going, "No, no, we refuse to believe this because when we were taught this age 11, the teacher said there are boys and there are girls, and that is it." And you're like, "Oh," and it's astonishing, and it's
Mm,
and there's so much stuff is coded and gendered when it doesn't need to be. And
mm,
it's the stuff of cartoons. It's like, why
yeah.
do we need to know the genitals of people
Yeah, because
when
like
we're
this, we're so obsessed with
yeah.
genitals. Like when you go to a toy shop, it's categorized by boys and girls, which means what genitals you have. It's ludicrous when you think about it.
There's a brilliant theory. I don't know if it's true, but there's a brilliant theory that this is all because of ultrasound, right? Because it used to be a situation where when your friend was having a baby, you would buy neutral colors because you did not know what they were going to have. It was only when the baby pops out
Oh,
that you know what gender they're going to
yeah.
be. Then we get ultrasound in the 1980s, and all of a sudden, months in advance what your friend's child is going to be. So sorry, I think that was my computer.
That's right.
Um, so yeah, so ultrasound comes along in the 1980s. All of a sudden, you can predict the gender of the child, and retailers go, "Oh yeah, this is brilliant because we can now have separate lines." Because again, we had a culture before things were passed on,
Mm.
and if you go back far enough, the colors were reversed, and it was blue for girls and pink
And
for boys.
skirts as well, right?
But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it got passed on. The neutral
Yeah.
stuff just got passed on through generations. But you
Mm.
can't do that with boys' toys and girls' toys. The boy doesn't want
Mm.
the Barbies. The girls don't want the Action Man.
Mm.
Although in my experience,
Some
the
do, but
boys, yeah. Um,
yeah.
and but you can't pass on, pink clothes to a boy. And you
Mm.
have this thing now where, like when my son was about 4 or 5, he loved nail polish,
Mhm.
particularly like sparkly nail polish because it's fun.
Yeah.
And he went to five-a-side football and was told in no uncertain terms by the other boys that, "Whoa, can't do that. That's not for boys."
Mm.
And it's like when you get to that sort of level of gendered nonsense, it's like we need to have a word with ourselves.
True, yeah.
You
And it's
know?
entangled with this whole disposable culture that we now have, right?
Yes, yeah,
Like,
very much
oh,
so.
it's just awful, really, when you look at it. Just the amount of stuff we go through. Anyway, that's a different conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, but you're right though, because we're starting to get equality in the wrong way. So we're starting
Mm.
to push the same sort of, hating your own body and your appearance onto boys that we've done for generations of women. It's
Mhm.
like that's not really the equality that we were hoping for.
No.
Um, and just the whole unreasonable expectations of just living in a time when your only value is as a consumer. And
Yep.
as you say, it is another much bigger conversation, but it is part of it,
Yeah.
I think.
Totally is. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I just wanted to revisit, like, you talked a bit about, the lesbian label that you're
Yeah.
almost exclusively attracted to women.
Yeah.
And you said, was it demisexual that you also said?
Yes.
Yeah. So what does that mean to you?
Demisexuals. This is another interesting one because I used to mock this kind of stuff as these are people that have been on the internet too much with all their new words for things. What was wrong with straight and gay and bi? That was fine.
Yeah.
But demisexual is where you don't it's a form of asexuality, but you're still attracted to people, but only to people that you have a very strong emotional bond with.
Mhm.
So I get into trouble for saying this because my friends laugh at me, but it's like I can look at a really attractive human and think of it in much the same way that I would a good-looking horse. It's like, oh, that's a fine-looking horse. I don't want to shag it. It's like, but I can admire the beauty of nature's creation.
Yeah, yeah.
There are very beautiful humans in the world where I can look at them and go, they're a very beautiful human.
Mhm.
In much the same way I can look at a guitar and that's a very beautiful guitar, and I don't want to shag that either.
Yeah.
But the thing for me is the emotional thing. So I was monstrously attracted to my wife because I was astonishingly in love with her. And again, it's like one of these things that makes sense in the rearview mirror. I used to develop these astonishingly intense crushes on people and then never do anything about it because I was scared that the reality wouldn't live up to it, or that they would find out that I was a weirdo and get the,
Mm.
the flaming torches out.
Mhm.
But it's quite interesting in our culture because I'm now single in a world of dating apps, and when I met my wife, we met on a dating app,
Oh,
but we
right.
kept that secret because the only people that were on dating apps were weirdos and murderers, and and it turns out I wasn't a murderer, um, but it's strange because it's such a visual culture now. So
Mm.
you go into these apps and here are 5 photos, 3 of which for some reason there was a rule that all lesbians have to be up a mountain with a mountain bike in their dating app profiles, and then another one has to
Ah.
have like a Snapchat cat filter on it, or it needs to be a group where there's 22 people, and it's like, which one are you? And
Yeah.
but it doesn't work for me because it's visual. It's like I might as well be looking through you know, I don't know. I don't like a catalog of clothes that I'm never going to buy. It's like,
Mm.
what is the point of this?
Mhm.
But it's interesting that again I consider myself to be just broken.
Mm.
And I think despite the best efforts of all the bad people in the world, this information is not going to go back. I grew up just as I was leaving school just as Section 28 came in to ban the supposed promotion of homosexuality. So there was no discussion
Mm.
of queerness in schools or in anything else,
Yeah.
that was publicly funded. And back then, you could do that. You could suppress information because we didn't have the internet.
Mm.
We didn't have Wikipedia. We didn't have very many publishers that were brave enough to publish books by queer people.
Mhm.
And we certainly didn't have the variety of stories being told that are being told now. So, whether it's, Juno Dawson or Sean Fay or, people like me or, Thomas Page McBee, who writes so beautifully about being a trans man, there's all this information out there. There's all these stories out there and they are not going back. And I try not to get angry and sad about it because you can't wallow in the past, but it's like, how many lives would be different if we knew then what we know now? If
Mm.
we had the understanding of gender then
Mhm.
that we have now, if we had the understanding of neurotypicality that we have now,
Mhm.
because because one of the things that I see again and again and again, I hang out in a lot of trans Reddits and a lot of ADHD Reddits and things like that.
Yeah.
And again and again, you see people going, "Oh my god, that's what it was. All of my life, I've known I was broken or thought I was broken, but it was
Mhm.
that."
Yeah.
And once you've got that, like a great example of that is like I don't have a diagnosis for ADHD, but my GP is absolutely certain that I've got it. And I think
Mhm.
when she asked why I thought I had, I talked nonstop for 22 minutes without taking a breath, and she's like, "Yeah, yeah, okay, I'm convinced." Um, but, but knowing that now, I understand things. So, for example, it sounds really, really wanky, right? But I bought a robot vacuum cleaner, and now my flat doesn't get so messy that I get really depressed.
Mm.
And and this is the thing, it's like I know that I want to have a clean flat, and I know that I should hoover at a particular time, but then I don't do it,
Yeah.
and then I look at the state of it, and I'm like, "Ah." Whereas now I've got a machine that does it for me automatically,
Yeah.
and I don't have that level of despair. So you have all of these things, and
Mhm.
I'm much more reliant on reminders and list making apps and productivity apps than I was before,
Yeah.
and it's helping because I'm understanding that these things are not because of faults in me. It's just that I'm not wired in a particular way
Yeah.
that makes me as good at these things as other people are. And
Mm.
what I'm good at other things that other people are not. So
Yeah.
let's automate that, and I'll do this. And with the gender thing, it's quite bittersweet. I see young trans people looking absolutely beautiful and happy, and part of me is green with envy
Mm.
because I mean, nearly 51. I'm 17 stones in weight. I've got this deep voice. I've got these big shoulders, these big hands, these big feet. There was nothing I can do to change any of that.
Mhm.
But had I known at 17 that it was possible, that there was such a thing as people like me, then I could have done something about it. I was talking to you earlier. I'm going in for a hair transplant tomorrow. It's cost
Mm.
me £10,500
Mm.
for a marginal improvement in my hairline because I hate wearing wigs.
Mm.
So that's added to the cost of facial electrolysis to get the stubble out of my face, which I've so far spent £16,000 on.
Wow, yeah.
And what could I have done with that money?
Mm.
If I didn't need to try and undo some of the things testosterone did. And
Yeah.
I think this is one of the things that makes me really positive about the future because the information is out there. We have a better understanding of it now, and
Mhm.
I think it will save a lot of people that. But I think for a lot of people of my generation, there's a lot of sadness. And there was one story I was told. One of the things about being trans is people talk to you about this stuff,
Mhm.
because a lot of people have got a family member or a friend
Yeah.
and sometimes it's appalling, right? So I was at a book thing, and another author was trying to be cool about trans people. So going, "Oh yes, I had a friend like you in the army. Then he used to go to tranny bars, and oh yes, all the time. And he was just like you, just a decent bloke. And just shut up, stop talking, please, right?"
Oh, no.
But equally, like I went to the optician, and the optician's assistant was like, "Oh yeah, my uncle became my auntie when they were like 80 something."
Mm.
And,
Wow.
and they died just a few years after, but those last years of their life were the happiest years of their life.
Wow,
And we were
yeah.
just talking about it,
Yeah.
and it's an enormous privilege of doing book events. I get a lot of people that come to talk to me because they know a trans person.
Yeah.
Um, Many more cis people that know a trans person than trans people come and talk to me at book events.
Mm.
And it's like there's a desire to understand, to be supportive, to not mess up. And most people I think are like that. I don't think most people are the baying mobs that we see on social media.
Not at all.
It's
They
not an
just
accurate
they're
picture.
just the loudest. They just get amplified the most,
They do.
unfortunately. But I
And
also,
social
yeah, I
sorry, go
also
ahead.
feel that hopeful as I am, I'm a bit like they might be the loudest, they might have the most airtime, which is unfortunate, don't get me wrong, but they're not the majority. They are not.
They're not, and I think it's gonna take a time, I think, for them to go quiet and give up.
Yep.
Years rather than months, certainly.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
it's not gonna be forgotten. The
Mhm.
people coming up are gonna remember that they were lied to, that these people deliberately demonize some of the most vulnerable people in the world,
Yep.
and they're not gonna forgive them for that. And you know, I'm not talking guillotines here. I need to stress that, but I think that there should be a reckoning from for example, the journalists that have deliberately amplified bigots because it makes for clicks.
Yep.
rather than doing their job because we've had a massive failure with journalism. We could have nipped this in the bud. I mean, loads of good examples of this. If you go to most places where they're talking about a ban on trans elite swimmers, and you say, "How many trans elite swimmers are there now?" The answer is zero. If you look at the number of trans people that have won all of these events that were supposedly threatening, the answer is none.
Mm.
You know, we've been, ever since Rennie Richards in the 1970s, we've been told that trans people are going to dominate sport. We haven't.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's that simple. It's like, okay, well, how many people are we talking about here? None. How many trans people are even in schools? And the way that it's often presented is very, very, very misleading.
Mm.
But in terms of, like I went to secondary school with 1,400 pupils.
Wow.
And to the best of my knowledge, there was no gay pupils, no trans pupils, no non-binary pupils, no asexual pupils, no pansexual pupils,
Mm.
no anything, right? And that's clearly not true. It's just they were keeping their heads down
Yep.
through fear.
Yeah.
And if you look at the numbers, we were what, maybe 0.5% of the population. So there
Mm.
were other trans people
Yeah.
at my school. Gay people are what, 10% maybe of the population? So clearly there were a couple of hundred gay people at my school.
Mm.
And if there would have been ace people, there would have been bi people. They just maybe didn't
Totally.
know the words for it.
Yeah.
And and that again is it's inevitable that that's
Mm.
going to change things because people
Yeah.
are tired of being put
Yeah.
away. And it was possible to do that when you only had 3 TV channels and a couple of newspapers, but you can't keep a
Mm.
lid on information like that anymore.
Totally.
And I
Totally.
think that's going to improve it
I think I
ultimately.
think it is improving slowly, but it will. It will.
Yeah.
All that other stuff that's just got to die out. It will die out. I'm sure of it.
Well, there's a bit in my book, and not to give a spoiler, but I talk about being in Categories, which is the queer bookshop in the south side of Glasgow,
Mhm.
and meeting this young woman who was just so like my eldest. You know that thing where their
Mm.
brain is going so fast their mouth can't keep up.
Yeah.
And she was telling me about her school where she's like in the gay straight alliance, and some of her friends are gay, and some of the other people that come to the gay straight alliance are just straight kids that just come for the chat.
Yeah.
And it's like, "Oh my god, what school is this?" It was my school, right?
Wow.
So the school that I was bullied in, that I wanted to see bombed from orbit
Right.
30 years ago, has got a
Gosh.
gay club. And,
Amazing.
they were following me on Twitter before I dumped Twitter, and it's like, it's that kind of stuff that
Yeah. Yeah.
that's changing, you know?
Mm.
And, oh, bless her, I lost my mum this year, but my
Oh.
mum is from a generation beforehand, and it's like, it was like almost as if she was delighted when I finally came out as trans because she'd always wanted a daughter and never did. And that meant
Yeah.
that she could do the psychological warfare of the Northern Ireland mother on me. It's like I would go in and she's like, "Oh, you're looking awfully fat." It's like, "Mum, I've not even said hello yet." And
Oh my
it's
gosh.
just that matter of factness,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it's really interesting to me that my greatest fear was for people to discover that
Mm.
I wasn't like the other boys. And now that I am, openly and
Embracing that. Yeah.
exuberantly trans,
Mm.
nobody gives a shit. It's not the most interesting thing about me.
Mm.
And
Mm.
and
Yeah.
that's brilliant. And I think, what I'd like to see is I'd like us to get to a point where people don't have to come out at all.
Yeah.
It's just like, and my daughter's generation are like that. She was talking about one of the guys that she knows was flirting with one of the other guys, and I was like, "Oh, is he gay?" And she's like, "I don't know." It's like they don't know. They don't label it like that. They're just like, "Well, he fancies him at the moment, but last week he fancied her,
Yeah.
and they fancy them, but they fancied him." And
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Totally. Oh, I
and
love that.
and yeah,
Yeah.
it's brilliant because it's a
Yeah.
sign that we are leaving behind an awful lot of terrible habits, I think.
Yeah. Definitely. Yes. Wow. Yeah. That feels like a good place to end on. But is there anything else that you would like to add that we haven't talked about yet?
Um, I think for the benefit of people who are not trans, who are or who are not out as being trans, I think it's really important to just reiterate something that we were both talking about there, which is that social media is not real and
Mm.
newspapers are not real.
Hmm.
And it's very, very easy to see all of the negativity that's online, that's in print, that's on the airwaves and think, oh my God, I'm going to get killed. And I believed that. When I first went out, I thought if I just even wore nail polish in public, I was probably gonna get murdered. And, here I am 7 years later, defiantly unmurdered.
Yeah.
People are not that interested. They've got much more important things to go on, and it's much more about,
Hmm.
the content of your character rather than the content of your trousers. And,
Yeah,
so
I love
it's
that.
so it's really important that we walk unafraid because this is our
Mm.
place too. We have a right to be here. We have always been here, and we always will be.
Hmm. Beautiful. I love that. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Carrie.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's been great.
Yay. You can find out more details on the website at 50shadesofgender.com/Carrie, where you can also read the transcript. And you can find Carrie on Linktree at Carrie Plays Guitar. Links are on the episode page. Thank you for listening to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. You can find us online at 50shadesofgender.com, on social media and on YouTube. Again, if you appreciate this podcast and want to support us, visit our website to make a donation, find out more about our allyship course and workshops, and details of how to join our community. We hope you will listen again. Until then, stay curious and open-minded.